Peter Lorre as Joel Cairo, the Maltese Falcon. In 1941's The Maltese Falcon, Peter Lorre as Joel Cairo delivered one of the most perplexing portrayals of the Golden Age. With his lavender-scented business card, prim gestures, and fixation on a jewel-encrusted bird, Cairo didn't fit the mold of a noir villain. Or any villain, really. His delicate mannerisms clashed so sharply with the film's gritty tone that audiences weren't sure whether to laugh, recoil, or both. Under the restrictive Hays Code, which banned explicit depictions of homosexuality, Cairo's ambiguous traits had to be buried in subtext. Today, film scholars often cite him as a textbook example of a coded queer character, one whose identity is implied through behavior rather than dialogue. Lorre, a Jewish actor who fled Nazi Germany in the 1930s, brought a strange, almost theatrical energy to the role. His high-pitched voice and overly fussy demeanor made Cairo stand out in every scene, sometimes more than the leads. Some speculate that Lorre's experience as an outsider in Hollywood helped him tap into Cairo's alienation, giving the character unexpected depth beneath the eccentricity. Stories suggest that director John Huston allowed Lorre to improvise many of Cairo's quirks, though the extent of that freedom remains debated. Regardless, the outcome was a figure so odd, so elusive, that viewers couldn't stop talking about him. Was he a threat? A joke? A tragic figure in disguise? That confusion made Joel Cairo unforgettable, and one of the strangest characters ever to slip through the cracks of the studio system. Charlie Chaplan as Monsieur Verdoux, 1947. When Charlie Chaplan stepped into the role of Henri Verdoux in April of 1947, audiences were stunned, not just by the film's content, but by Chaplin's transformation. Gone was the lovable tramp. In his place stood a suave, philosophical murderer who justified his crimes as a form of economic logic. Verdoux, a former bank clerk who marries and eliminates wealthy widows for financial gain, was loosely based on the infamous French criminal Henri Désiré Landru. But unlike Landru, who was executed in 1922, Verdoux was crafted as a sharply satirical figure, equal parts gentleman, cynic, and social critic. Chaplan had already begun distancing himself from the tramp with the great dictator in 1940, but Verdoux marked an even more radical shift. The film's tone, dark, ironic, and laced with social commentary, left many viewers baffled. One moment Verdoux delivers a charming line, the next he's calmly planning another victim's demise. His infamous line, "A war's conflict, it's all business," drew a chilling parallel between murder and capitalism, and it didn't land well in post-war America. Released just 2 years after the end of World War II, the film's biting critique of economic systems and moral hypocrisy clashed with the national mood. Some cities boycotted it, and Chaplin's already tense relationship with American institutions worsened. The FBI had opened a file on him as early as 1922, and rumors swirled that J. Edgar Hoover saw Verdoux as further evidence of Chaplin's alleged subversive leanings. Reviews were split. The New York Times called it a grim joke, while The Nation praised its intellectual boldness. European audiences, particularly in France, responded more favorably, and over time, critics have reappraised Verdoux as one of Chaplin's most daring creations. In a twist of irony, the film even earned an Academy Award nomination for Best Original Screenplay. Verdoux endures as a remarkably odd figure of the Golden Age, not just for what he did, but for how calmly he explained it. A killer in a cravat, quoting philosophers and mocking the system, he blurred the line between satire and sociopathy. For Chaplan, it was a bold artistic gamble. For audiences, it was a character who looked like a gentleman but spoke like a warning. Elsa Lanch as the Bride. Bride of Frankenstein, 1935. Elsa Lanch's Bride barely appeared on screen, less than 5 minutes, but created a legacy that scholars still parse today. In James Whale's 1935 sequel, she hissed, shrieked, and glared, never uttering a syllable. Yet this voiceless figure evolved into one of early horror's most perplexing icons. Lanchester performed dual roles, also portraying Mary Shelley in the opening segment. This choice was more than clever. It intentionally linked author and creation, reflecting themes of unnatural birth and artistic aftermath. Film historian David J. Skell noted how this narrative mirroring introduced a haunting undertone that many in 1935 overlooked. What truly unnerved viewers, however, was the bride's physical presence. Lanchester once noted she modeled her movements on swans, creatures she described as both elegant and erratic. That influence appeared in her fluttery posture, wide-eyed glare, and a hairstyle that looked like it was struck by lightning, thanks to makeup maestro Jack Pierce. Then came the reversal. When the monster, portrayed by Boris Karloff, reaches out, she recoils with revulsion. No love, no solace, just disgust. Certain critics regarded it as a brilliant tragedy. Others were simply bewildered. After all, wasn't this supposed to be his triumphant moment? Speculation proliferated for decades. Some guessed the bride was more than a failed companion, perhaps a warning about humanity overreaching its bounds and overturning social expectations. Scholars like Rona J. Berenstain argued that the role encapsulated anxieties about female autonomy in a society bracing for upheaval. Strange barely begins to capture it. She wasn't cruel, nor was she benevolent. She hovered between the two, an enigma wrapped in bandages and lightning. With only a shriek, Elsa Lanchester forged an immortal figure. Gloria Holden as Countess Maria Zaleska, Dracula's daughter, 1936. A vampire who wanted out, Countess Maria Zaleska wasn't hunting for blood, she was hunting for freedom. In Universal's Dracula's Daughter, released on May 11, 1936, Gloria Holden portrayed the undead countess with a chilling stillness that left audiences perplexed. Unlike the flamboyant menace of Bela Lugosi's Dracula, Zaleska was subdued, elegant, and deeply conflicted. She didn't seduce, she pleaded. Her visit to a psychiatrist in hopes of curing her vampirism flipped horror conventions on their head. Critics of the period were unsure how to assess her. The New York Times called the film a curiosity, noting its somber tone and ambiguous mood. It wasn't the usual monster fare. Zaleska's identity crisis, her refusal to fully embrace her dark nature, and her eerie calm gave her an alien presence that felt more psychological than supernatural. The film stirred quiet controversy, too. One scene in particular, where Zaleska invites a young female model to her studio under the guise of painting her, sparked speculation. While the Hays Code forced Universal to sanitize overt implications, the subtext lingered. Film historian Vito Russo later highlighted the moment in his 1981 book, The Celluloid Closet, interpreting it as one of Hollywood's earliest examples of coded same-gender desire. Behind the scenes, Holden reportedly didn't want the role. Rumors suggest she feared being typecast in horror films, and some dare to guess that her reluctance bled into her performance. Her distant, statuesque presence gave the Countess a feeling of detachment, neither fully villain nor victim, just other. At the box office, Dracula's Daughter didn't match the success of its predecessor, but it did earn a modest profit. Over time, its reputation grew. Contemporary commentators, including Kim Newman and David Skal, have praised the film's psychological tension and its bold deviation from genre norms. What once confounded audiences now fascinates them. In an era of clear-cut monsters, Zaleska was something far stranger, a vampire haunted not by her victims, but by herself. Lon Chaney as Professor Ekko, The Unholy Three, 1925. In 1925, Lon Chaney delivered one of his most peculiar performances in the silent film The Unholy Three. As Professor Ekko, a ventriloquist who moonlights as a criminal, Chaney didn't just adopt a disguise. He fully transformed into Granny O'Grady, an elderly woman running a pet shop front. The dual identity was so convincing that folklore claims early audiences were genuinely fooled, unaware both roles were played by the same man. Chaney's mastery of makeup, crafted entirely by his own hand, earned him the nickname the Man of a Thousand Faces, and this role cemented that reputation. He was joined by Harry Earls as Tweedledee, a manipulative performer posing as a baby, and Ivan Lino as the brutish Hercules. The trio's bizarre cover, selling parrots while plotting robberies, was unsettling enough, but it was Ekko's calm, eerie presence that left viewers puzzled. Was this a criminal, a performer, or something in between? Some contemporary scholars have speculated that Ekko's fluid persona subtly toyed with gender expectations of the era, though the film itself never made this explicit. Still, the ambiguity only deepened the character's strangeness. By the time The Unholy Three hit theaters, Chaney was already known for grotesque roles in The Hunchback of Notre Dame and The Phantom of the Opera. But Ekko stood apart. Not just another monster, but a man hiding in plain sight, wrapped in deception and daring audiences to question what they were really watching. Harpo Marx as Pinky, Horse Feathers, 1932. In a film brimming with verbal gymnastics, Harpo Marx's Pinky didn't say a single word, and somehow left audiences more bewildered than anyone else on screen. Released in 1932, Horse Feathers features Harpo as a mute student-turned-football player whose antics seem untethered from logic, plot, or even gravity. Pinky communicates using horns, whistles, and pantomime, but it's his surreal unpredictability that makes him unforgettable. He pulls objects like fish and hammers from his trench coat, chases women with cartoonish zeal, and plays a harp solo in the midst of chaos. While Groucho delivered razor-sharp one-liners and Chico twisted language like a pretzel, Harpo drifted through scenes like a walking fever dream. His character's behavior often ignored the rules of time and space. He could vanish from one room and instantly reappear in another, sometimes with no clear entrance or exit. In one moment, he's extracting a swordfish from his coat pocket. In another, he's riding a horse indoors. The logic? There isn't any. And that's precisely the point. Critics of the era were uncertain how to interpret him. Some praised his performance as a masterclass in visual comedy, while others dismissed it as chaotic nonsense. Film historian Glenn Mitchell once described Harpo's screen presence as a kind of childlike anarchy, a phrase that still resonates. Rumors have swirled for decades that Harpo's refusal to speak was more than just a gag. It was, others have theorized, a subtle protest against the rise of talkies, a nod to the silent era he revered. Unlike silent stars such as Charlie Chaplin, whose tramp character often carried heavy social commentary, Pinky was pure absurdity. No backstory, no motive, just surreal behavior that left audiences laughing and thoroughly mystified. And while Harpo used the same silent persona across all Marx Brothers films, it's in Horse Feathers that his eccentricity feels most unhinged. Pinky didn't just break the fourth wall, he ignored it altogether. He wasn't bound by narrative rules or character arcs. He roamed in his own comedic universe, one where logic took a back seat to lunacy. That kind of unpredictability wasn't just rare during the golden age of Hollywood, it was downright bizarre. James Stewart as Elwood P. Dowd, Harvey, 1950. In 1950's Harvey, James Stewart portrayed Elwood P. Dowd, a genial, perpetually courteous man who introduces strangers to his best friend, an invisible 6-foot rabbit named Harvey. Not a pet, not a hallucination. Elwood insists Harvey is a puka, a mischievous spirit from Celtic folklore. The film never clarifies whether Harvey is imaginary or genuine, leaving audiences with a question that has sparked debate for over 70 years. Was Elwood deluded, or was he uniquely attuned to see what others could not? That enigma became the film's peculiar lifeblood. Stewart's performance anchored the surreal premise with warmth and sincerity. He first played Elwood on stage before reprising the role in the 1950 movie and again in a 1970 Broadway revival. Different reviewers interpreted Elwood as a harmless dreamer. Others viewed him as a subtle rebel challenging post-war conformity. Film historian Donald Dewey observed Stewart's portrayal gave Elwood a serene dignity, lending his eccentricity an almost enlightened quality. Rumors circled studio corridors that the rabbit symbolized repressed yearnings or social alienation, though the filmmakers never confirmed any allegorical meaning. In an era when mental health was largely swept under the rug, Harvey dodged medical labels and left the audience wrestling with Elwood's reality. That deliberate ambiguity, coupled with Stewart's earnest charm, made Elwood P. Dowd one of the most intriguing and quietly subversive figures of classic American cinema. Ray Bolger as the Scarecrow, The Wizard of Oz, 1939. Ray Bolger didn't just play the Scarecrow, he fought for it. Originally cast as the Tin Man, Bolger convinced MGM to swap roles with Buddy Ebsen, believing his lanky frame and vaudeville roots were better suited to the floppy, brain-seeking figure. That decision changed the course of the film, and nearly ended Ebsen's career. Ebsen suffered a severe allergic reaction to the aluminum paste used in the Tin Man's makeup and was hospitalized, forcing MGM to recast the role with Jack Haley. Bolger, meanwhile, threw himself into the Scarecrow with uncanny precision. His loose-limbed movements, choreographed largely by himself, gave the character a surreal, almost puppet-like quality. His rubber prosthetics caused visible irritation and temporary facial marks, but Bolger reportedly endured it all to preserve the illusion. While children found the Scarecrow endearing, others were left mystified. He asked for a brain, yet often delivered the smartest insights. His logic zigzagged, his stare was blank, and his walk was pure chaos. Film historian Aljan Harmetz described Bulger's portrayal as both lovable and slightly disturbing, a contradiction that only added to the character's strangeness. Some scholars have speculated that the Scarecrow's paradox reflected deeper cultural anxieties of the Great Depression. A man who believes he's inadequate, despite proving otherwise, mirrored the self-doubt of a generation struggling with unemployment and identity. And legends tease that Bulger's original full-length dance number, largely cut from the final film, was so bizarre in tone that it risked unsettling early test audiences. Even decades later, the Scarecrow remains one of cinema's most puzzling creations. A straw-stuffed enigma who might have had a brain all along, but just needed someone to tell him so. Donald O'Connor as Cosmo Brown, Singin' in the Rain, 1952. In a film packed with polished choreography and romantic charm, Cosmo Brown stood out like a cartoon character crashing a Broadway revue. Donald O'Connor's portrayal in Singin' in the Rain wasn't just comedic, it was mind-boggling. Equal parts vaudeville, mime, and mayhem, Cosmo's antics often felt like they belonged in a different movie altogether. Audiences in the early 1950s were charmed, yet equally bemused. Who was this hyperkinetic sidekick who seemed to defy gravity, logic, and sometimes narrative purpose? His showstopper, Make 'em Laugh, became legendary for its physical intensity. O'Connor reportedly shot the number over 2 days, collapsing from exhaustion afterward and spending several days bedridden. Some accounts even claim he suffered bruised ribs during the sequence. And just when he thought it was over, damaged footage forced him to redo the entire routine. The scene, featuring wall flips, pratfalls, and a wrestling match with a mannequin, pushed physical comedy into surreal territory. Cosmo didn't just support the leads, he often eclipsed them. His exaggerated expressions, unpredictable timing, and cartoonish logic felt out of step with the rest of the film's sleek musical world. Some film historians have suggested that Cosmo functioned as a meta-commentary on the absurdity of showbiz itself. Others speculate he was a holdover from silent film slapstick, dropped into the Technicolor era like a time traveler who never got the memo. Legends tease that O'Connor's performance was so offbeat, studio executives initially questioned whether it would clash with the film's romantic tone. Instead, it became one of its most iconic elements. Cosmo Brown wasn't just comic relief. He was an absolute paradox. Charming yet chaotic, supportive yet scene-stealing, rooted in vaudeville but seemingly untethered from reality. Clifton Webb as Waldo Lecker, Laura, 1944. In a decade dominated by tough guy detectives and sultry femme fatales, Waldo Lecker stood out like a martini at a prayer meeting. Played with frosty exactitude by Clifton Webb, Lecker was a refined newspaper columnist whose fixation on the ostensibly dead Laura Hunt blurred the line between sorrow and control. He wasn't merely eccentric, he was chillingly composed, wielding his wit like a razor and his devotion like a cage. His biting narration and tidy lifestyle veiled a more sinister psyche that confounded viewers in the 1940s. Webb, previously recognized for stage roles in light comedy, was an improbable selection for a noir antagonist. Director Otto Preminger took a bold chance, casting him against type. And it worked. Critics of the period remarked on the contradiction between Webb's polished manner and the character's obsessive, manipulative tendencies. Some researchers, including film historian David Thompson, identify Lecker as a template for the urbane but dangerous voice in noir, a man whose eloquence cloaked a disintegrating interior. Speculation has long persisted about whether Webb's detached persona seeped into the role, stoking debate that the performance was less of a metamorphosis and more of an accentuation. Others have noted the character's perplexing motives and ambiguous traits, fueling continuous conversations about why Lecker's obsession ran so deep. Reviews from the era described audiences as both riveted and disturbed, unsure whether to chuckle at his sharp remarks or recoil from his icy dominance. Either way, Waldo Lecker remains a haunting presence, as strange and incisive as ever. If you've enjoyed this video, please leave a like and comment. Also consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell to get notified of our new videos each week. Thanks for watching.